Welcome, everybody. My name is Steve Sampson, and you're watching another Rena-Fi interview on financial literacy. Today, we have a very special guest. This is Jen Lee. She is a a debt and credit attorney. Sorry about that, Jen. She's a debt and credit attorney. I'll let her talk a little bit about her background, but we're going to dive pretty quickly into, how to avoid debt. What are the problems people find themselves running into? Why do they run into those problems? How can we avoid it? And all sorts of different strategies. So Janet, let me pass it to you and just tell us just briefly how you got to become a debt and credit attorney.
Thanks. Well, it's actually a made-up term. Most attorneys who practice debt and credit are bankruptcy attorneys. And so that's how I originally started out. I was a bankruptcy attorney, and I found that there were a lot of people out there who didn't necessarily need bankruptcy, but they needed someone to walk them through their debt and credit problems. And so I kind of created my own little niche advising people. And to be honest, 70% of Americans have a debt or credit problem of some sort. So it's a widespread problem. So I started getting into more advising on people's legal rights and what they can do to get out of debt and have good credit and that kind of thing. So I help clients every day figure out their next steps forward. And then I hopefully try to get them to not make the same mistakes again, because that happens a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And how long have you been doing this?
Almost 10 years.
Okay.
So I started as an attorney in 2010, and prior to law school, I was in insurance and financial planning for almost 10 years. So I have a pretty wide financial background, and that's kind of what drew me into this kind of practice area.
Let me ask you the first question. 70% really surprised me. If 70% of Americans are struggling with this, right? Mm-hmm. Currently struggling with this?
Yes.
Yeah. So if 70% of Americans are currently struggling with this, that means only 30% aren't. And of those 30% who aren't, there's a 70% chance for everybody that they, so yeah, it touches every individual, every family, everybody.
And you'd be really surprised. So I use an elephant as my mascot. And I always tell people the elephant in the room is that 70% of the people of any room you walk into have a debt or credit problem, but nobody wants to talk about it. Yeah. And nobody knows that anyone else has that exact same problem. So it's very isolating. People think they're alone.
Is that the elephant behind you? Is that why?
That's one of my elephants, yes. And her name is Burn a Debt. So people get it when I slow it down.
Very clever, yes.
So yeah, I take her everywhere, and she has become a mascot for what I do because people feel like they're alone. And it's kind of an easier way to soften up a hard topic.
How do you start to unravel this Gordian knot of debt?
Yeah, so I tell people, and it's scary, but write down what debt you have, because a lot of people don't actually know how much debt they have. It's kind of out there, it's kind of running up, the credit card, student loans, maybe taxes, and they don't exactly know how much, and they're scared to total it up because then it becomes more real.
Right.
And so I always say, write down what you have as your first step, because if you don't know where you start, you can't start. So that's always the first step, is to just write down and get an idea of what you have.
You said it's scary because it makes it more real.
Yeah.
But I guess making it real is the first step to deal with it, right?
Yes. And it's psychology. There's a lot of psychology to deal with in debt and credit issues. And yes, you have to be willing to sit down and deal with it first. Yep. So realizing there's a problem is the first step in a lot of recovery programs.
Seeing it clearly and writing it down and saying, this is not a mysterious, overpowering opponent. It's just a big pile of stuff, and I'm just going to have to dig through it.
Right. And people's tendencies are to ignore it, because if they ignore it, then maybe it goes away. So it never does, but that's what your mind does to you sometimes, is you're like, if I ignore it, then it's not really there.
Right.
It's the elephant in the room, but it's not there.
It's not there. Exactly. I don't have to, as long as I don't look in that direction, I don't have to acknowledge that there's an elephant in the room. Yeah. Now, when it comes to debt, especially debt that's gotten out of control, that elephant's going to be calling you on the phone several times a day, kind of harassing you. And I think people, if you don't avoid things, you don't pick up the phone, right?
Exactly. So you start ignoring all your calls.
So for your creditors, right? For the people that you owe money to, what does it tell them if you're not answering the phone?
If you're not answering the phone, it tells them that you're probably in trouble. And most credit card companies and most unsecured type credits, like personal loans or online loans that you get, if you're one day late, they start blowing up your phone because they're not secured against anything. It's not like a mortgage or anything like that. And they know if they don't harass you, then they're probably never going to get paid. I will say I have a lot of clients who come in who are current on their credit cards, but behind on their mortgage where they live. And the reason for that is because credit card companies will blow up your phone as soon as you're one day late, but the mortgage company doesn't because they're secured. They don't really have that. And so it's actually opposite of what you should be doing. You should be paying your mortgage. And if you can't pay the credit cards, don't pay them. But yes, those phone blowing up is a big problem.
Let's say someone is in a position where their credit cards have gotten out of control and they just can't get ahead, right? They're accumulating more interest than they can ever possibly stay ahead of. And let's say they've done the first step, right? Let's say that they have sat down and they've said, geez, I owe $8,000 here and $12,000 there and, all this stuff. So now at least I know how big of an elephant it is.
Right.
What can they do? What's the next step?
Ask for help. Find out what their options are. Find out what they can do with that.
Who do they ask?
Well, they can ask me or they can ask any attorney the reason why I say go to an attorney is because an attorney will tell you all of your legal rights and options and what can happen if you don't pay the debt. I have a lot of people who get scammed because they go online late at night when they're all stressed out and trying to figure out what to do with this. And they see these offers on TV for pennies on the dollar, settle your debt. You don't have to pay it back. The government has sponsored a program. And most of those, honestly, are scams because those companies don't tell you all your rights and options. You're calling in and you're getting a salesperson. And all they're doing is selling their program. And so people think that they have no other options other than to sign up with these types of companies. And so I do a lot of educating on sometimes it's sometimes it works. Sometimes that is the best option, but at least find out what all of your options are and what that looks like long-term so that you are making an educated decision on what to do with that. So,
share with you a little bit. So I got myself into some trouble with some back taxes years ago. And everybody that I knew, right, my family would say, oh, I saw this commercial, you should talk to these people, and all of this stuff. And I told them, I said, it's a scam, right? If I got something in the mail, like I got a notice in the mail saying official, all that stuff on it, but it didn't have a return address. And I got so many of them at the time that I just tossed them out. And my girlfriend at the time said, what are you doing? This might be, and I said, if the IRS sends a letter, they put their return address on it.
Yes.
And I knew, if I get a phone call, it's not the IRS. The IRS doesn't call, right? So I was very sort of wary of these scams. And what I did, and I don't think I got scammed, but I think I spent more money than I needed to for what I got. I said, you know what? I'm just going to find a real attorney. And I found one, and it was like $3,000 or $4,000 later. Things were still sort of in limbo, and he was doing research, working on stuff. And he called me one time, and we talked for a little while. I just wanted to see how I was doing and check in and that sort of thing. And then, like the next week, I got an invoice for that call. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's an attorney, but a different type of attorney. And he said, was it towards the end of the month? I said,
billables.
Yeah, I think it was. And then a month later, on like the 26th or 27th, I saw on my phone that he was calling. Because what my attorney friend said is, he said, it's just billable hours. It's the end of the month. He's trying to get some billable hours. And again, I wish my attorney friend had been a tax attorney, but he said, for him as an attorney, if he reaches out for clarification or something, he's not going to bill the client for that. If the client wants him to do some work, or he finds some information but he's always going to, so that it turned me off so much. It just turned me off so much. I never went back. I never used him again. And my friend said, if you he said, a good attorney is worth whatever they charge. But there's a lot of things that a good CPA can do as far as like helping you. So what can a CPA do? This is my question to you. It was a long walk to get there. My question to you.
There's a couple things I'll address in there, but yes.
So what sorts of things can a good CPA or even a bookkeeper do
Yep.
that will be cheaper than an attorney? And what sort of things can an attorney do? That'll be the first part.
Okay.
And then the second part is just, how do you find a good attorney?
So a good CPA will help. If you owe taxes for any given year, they'll help you usually set up an installment agreement with the IRS. So CPAs can be very helpful in setting up those types of agreements. Some of them, or an enrolled agent, can help you with an offer in compromise if that's what you're doing. Now, it's very hard to qualify for offer in compromise. If you're employed and have any assets, it's hard to qualify for. And that's where most of the scams on TV get into, is they'll charge you a lot of money to do an offer in compromise and say, oh, you're only going to owe pennies on the dollar. And then it gets rejected. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. You'll have to pay your taxes. And that's the scam, is they're charging you a lot of money to do that. So a good CPA can go a long way towards helping you get an installment agreement. Now, if you owe multiple years of taxes and you have the IRS knocking on your door, that's when you likely will need to either talk to a tax attorney, or you can actually get rid of taxes in bankruptcy, and people don't realize that. And so I do a lot of initial consulting work to figure out if they have other debt, or if we're just dealing with taxes, if bankruptcy is an option for that. Because most people don't know that there are options besides an installment agreement and offer in compromise. So, and I don't do hourly billing. To go back to your situation, I'm flat fee only. So, and I charge $199 for an initial session. So if you're looking for an attorney, or how to find a good attorney, if you're going to a free consultation with an attorney, they're trying to sell you something, and that's for any business. That's not just attorneys. So if you go to a free consultation, they're trying to sell you something. So be aware of what their practice area is and what their options are. For example, in bankruptcy, if you go to a bankruptcy attorney and they do a free consult, they're going to try to push you into Chapter 7, Chapter 13, Chapter 11, because that's how they get paid.
Right. Right.
So if you're looking for an attorney, look for someone who has online reviews, although those can go both ways, because all attorneys have clients who kind of go a little astray sometimes and try to leave bad reviews. Look for a personal referral, or someone that you've seen in the media or speaking somewhere is usually what I tell people to look for, because if they have a good following and they have great clients who have attested to their value, that's usually what I recommend for an attorney. And then make sure that they have experience in whatever you're asking them to do. If a client comes to me and says, I need help with a real estate landlord-tenant issue, I immediately send them somewhere else.
Got it. Got it. How common is it to find a flat fee attorney versus an hourly rate attorney?
It's not that common. However, it's becoming more common. There are those of us who in the legal field think that hourly billing is the most inefficient way to handle clients and do that. And so I do a lot of speaking and a lot of talking to attorneys about how they can transition to more of a value-based pricing and a flat fee model. So bankruptcy attorneys' fees are almost always flat fee, because we quote based on the complications of the case. And so our clients need to have a budget that they're working on. But a lot of attorneys still are in the hourly billing mode of things.
That's really good advice. And I think, I think social media, for all of the negative aspects of it, but I think this sort of word of mouth through social media really extends itself. Although I will say, whether it's Amazon or an attorney or anything, this for our viewers, everybody who has online reviews has friends who help pad those reviews.
That's very true.
Yeah. If I go to Amazon and I see a product that has 5-star reviews, but only 6 of them, I'm like, there are probably 6 people working at that company who wrote those reviews. So I do think it's important to, like you mentioned, to find somebody who has a following,
right?
Because that gives credibility. And that's what you want when you're handing your financial life, putting your financial life in somebody's hands, basically.
Right, exactly. And I will say about social media too, is that people go on Facebook and they feel like they're alone because everyone's posting about their trips to Maui and their cars, and they're not saying all the bad stuff that's happening with them. So that's part of my elephant in the room concept as well, is that we go on social media and it's very overwhelming and disheartening because you think everyone else is doing great.
Right. Well, and it's a distorted view.
It is.
People are posting their most fabulous, imaginary, unsubstantiated life. And it's
Yes, they're talking about it. They're millionaires or whatever.
I mean, it's one of the things we're trying to do at Rena-Fi, right? We're trying to make the elephant in the room less of an elephant and just part of what we all experience. Like you said, I keep going back to it. If 70% of us, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a room with 30 people, right? A classroom, a workshop, something like that, 30 people, well, 20 plus people are experiencing right at this moment credit or other types of debt problems and stress and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So I want to talk more about the nuts and bolts of the debt and credit and the attorney and all that. But you also mentioned when we were talking earlier about stress, about managing that stress.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
I think it's debilitating sometimes.
It is, and I do a lot of study on the effects that stress, especially financial stress, have in the workplace, on relationships, and in health. So they say, if you start with health, 70% of illnesses are due to stress. 70%. I know the 70% is running or is our theme here. It's kind of ironic, but 70% of illnesses, according to the APA, the American Physician Association, I know it's the APA, and it says, money and finances are literally making Americans sick because you get anxiety, you stay up late at night, you stress, depression. It has physical manifestations too. I have clients who come into my office and they're literally hunched over. Like you can see the stress just kind of emanating off of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that has effects on, your neck, headaches, stomach problems, and that kind of thing. And when I start talking to them and we figure out, okay, here are your 4 to 6 options, because almost everyone has 4 to 6 options available to them. You can see them, like their shoulders start relaxing. You can see them relax. And I had a client a few weeks ago who was 78 years old with financial stress. And you don't want to be retired and have financial stress. And she said she hadn't been sleeping for like 4 or 5 days. And by the time she talked to me and we figured out her plan, she emailed me the next day and she's like, I slept last night. I actually slept. So it has a lot of physical manifestations. And then in the workplace, employers are losing over $300 billion a year because of their employees' financial stress. The Department of Labor did a study.
Wait, can you say that number again?
Over $300 billion is what U.S. employers are losing because of their employees' financial stress. And the way that manifests is Department of Labor did a study and found that $7,000 per year per employee is what an employer loses in productivity when an employee is financially stressed. And it can come in the form of spending 3 hours a week on their own personal finances at work, not being productive because their mind is somewhere else, absenteeism, tardiness, medical insurance premiums go up because when people are stressed, they get sick more. And then workers' comp premiums also go up because people have accidents at work when they're distracted. And so it's a huge problem that employers aren't really willing to listen to these days yet. A lot of them have implemented financial literacy programs, which great. That's a very proactive solution. And I applaud any financial literacy program out there. However, the people that are currently stressed will not get a benefit from financial literacy until they do a reactive solution approach to their current problem. And so that's the problem I have with a lot of financial literacy programs that employers implement, is that they're not solving the problem. They're just saying, oh, we have a great financial literacy program as part of their offerings. So,
right, exactly. Yeah, it's window dressing. And it's interesting that you say that because, I've got nieces and nephews. I'm in my mid-50s, 54. Yeah. But I've got nieces and nephews who are in college or entering the workplace or all that sort of thing. And I think, oh, if I could, I'm sure every parent or, if I could just help them understand now, at their age, the lessons that took me 30 years or more to learn. And I think that this financial literacy has the same sort of thing. Like, we're a financial literacy education company. Our goal is to improve, we're a Renaissance finance, right? So we want a renaissance in how people think about money and talk about money and plan, all of these skills. That's really what we're hoping for, is this sort of blossoming of financial literacy and services and everything. But to sort of bring it back to what you're talking about, you have to stop the bleeding first, right? So if 70% of people in general, which means 70% of your employees, if you're an employer,
Yes.
70% of your employees from every level of the company.
Every level. I get CEOs down to the janitor as
Yeah.
client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to stop the bleeding, which just means whatever your financial or your credit tax, whatever your financial pain is, let's make that not manage. I'm sorry, let's make it not critical and not chronic. It's just something that happened. You had this ailment, you had this situation, figured it out, we
Let's
dealt
solve
with
it.
and then we move on. And then moving on, that's where the financial literacy, I think, comes in of, how can we lay a better foundation and institute better habits? And you said that that's something you do also, right? You help people who are in crisis.
Yes.
But then you take them to the next step.
Yeah. So one of my goals is I don't want repeat business.
Right.
I would like clients to not have to ever talk to me again. I mean, obviously I like my clients and I like them as people, but I don't ever want them to have to come back in and say, I got myself in the same situation again.
Right.
And so I tell people all the time, I would love to work myself out of a job as a debt and credit attorney and into, okay, now we're proactively talking about financial literacy and the things that happen.
Right.
The issue with the financial wellness or the financial literacy, especially in the workplace, is they'll do lunch and learns or something like that where they have an insurance person come in and give a financial advisor presentation.
Right.
And some of the problem with that is that no one's going to show up to talk about debt or credit. They don't want anyone else to know. There's a stigma with it. And the ones that do show up, they're talking about 401k or investments or budgeting. And that makes people feel even worse about themselves because they can't contribute to they think they can't contribute to their 401k and their budget's a mess.
Yeah.
And so I find that those programs are actually doing the opposite of what they were intended to do.
Got it. So let's ideal world, right? Let's say you're creating a system for employers. Let's say you just have one client, one employer who says, look, I've got, we're not huge, but we've got 1,000 employees.
Yep.
And it kills me to think that 700 of them
are
experiencing this. So what can we offer our employees to help them get out of that situation and not get back into it? What can employers do?
And so if they have 1,000 employees, according to the Department of Labor, they're losing $7 million a year in productivity. That's what that study shows, is they're losing $7 million a year. So when I started running those statistics and looking at things, I actually did develop an employer program. I have a program that employers can purchase that helps employees with financial stress. And what it does is it gives them one-to-one attorney-client privilege advice. Every employee gets their own session. It's either Zoom or it's not in the workplace where it's like a revolving door where people can see who's talking because no one wants anyone to know about this.
It's private. They have privacy.
Exactly. And it's attorney-client privilege. The employer doesn't even get information on who uses the program or what the problem was. They just get feedback on the numbers of people who use the program and the final productivity analysis, that kind of thing. And what I have found is that employers aren't quite willing to admit that this is the problem in the workplace. And so it takes a lot of convincing and a lot of telling them that you really should care about it, because a lot of them want to plug their ears and say, la, 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 this isn't happening in my workplace. So yes, I did create a program to give people attorney-client privileged advice because I found that they often need legal advice. It's not something where they need a financial planner to come in and tell them about budgeting. They do. I often recommend out to those places, but they need someone to tell them what their legal options are so that they can get out of whatever it could be student loans, it could be credit cards, it could be a mortgage or foreclosure issue. There's a wide range of things. Or it could even be just a credit report issue. I get people who are applying for mortgages and they're at work trying to submit all the documents to their mortgage broker or underwriter or whatever because they keep asking for 70,000 bank statements or whatever. And that's how they're spending their time at work, and they find out their credit score is too low and they're trying to figure out why. And so even those types of things, it only takes me an hour to go through and figure out, okay, this is what you need to do, here's your plan. They don't even need me anymore. They just needed someone to tell them what their plan is.
Yeah. So, wow, that sounds fantastic.
And so the name of that program is Employees Are Assets, because if you appreciate employees, they appreciate in value.
Yep.
And so that's how I named the program, was because if you treat employees like they're the assets that they are, not asses, assets.
Assets.
That's hard to enunciate sometimes, but they're assets that the employer should want to cultivate and make them improve, basically.
Right. Even aside from the productivity gains of just not being stressed out and distracted and all those things,
Mm-hmm.
the gratitude
Yes.
I would feel
Yep.
for a company that cared enough about me to help me, and an hour with an attorney, or even just a mentor who had been through it, even if they're not
Yes.
an attorney, to just say,
Yes. Yeah.
look, it's manageable,
Mm-hmm.
it's uh, far more common, you don't need to be ashamed. That's the thing, is
Yeah.
the shame of it, the
The
stigma, kind of from a
stigma.
social standpoint, but just from a
Yeah. Yeah.
personal standpoint, the
Yeah.
shame can be paralyzing.
I see a lot of that, and people will come in and they'll be so embarrassed, and then once we figure out what they can do, they're like, wait, this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
I can resolve this. I didn't realize that I had options. I had a guy back in December in my office who was crying, and the reason why he was crying was because for 10 years people had told him he couldn't do anything about this student loan issue that he had. And he's like, you're the first person who gave me hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was a fairly simple fix.
Right.
Just no one had explained to him that he had these rights
Yeah.
to resolve the issue. So
And for 10 years,
yeah.
not only was the problem getting worse, but
Yeah.
his perception of himself and his
Yep.
how disempowering and all that sort of thing it can be.
Relationships too. I
Oh,
see a lot of relationship issues due to financial issues, and kids. So one of my hot topics is kids coming out of high school, going to college. Student loans are
right.
an epidemic these days. And kids, their money mindset is set before they're 7 years old. And parents think that they're hiding their financial issues from their kids, and they're not.
Yeah.
The kids know that they may not know the adult words for things and the adult,
But they pick up on.
but they know that there's something wrong. And I see a lot of generational issues. I'll have the grandparent, their child, and then the grandchild in my office sometimes, because it's the same things over and over, the same cycle.
Yep.
Because that's what they learned when they were young. So
Yeah.
I see a lot of relationship issues and problems with kids not getting financial literacy and not understanding when they take on these student loans and these credit cards, what that actually means when they graduate.
As a parent, let's say, as a parent who knows that they don't have great financial habits,
Right.
what are some things that they can do with we'll start with young children and then we'll move up from there, but with their young children, what are some things that you think a parent can do to instill a good, proactive, responsible mindset about money?
I think talking about money in general, as long as you're being positive about it, there's such a societal tendency not to talk about money. We don't talk about how much you make. You don't talk about, money in general. And so I think just talking about finances with kids can be very helpful. And even as starting as early as 4 or 5 or 6, giving them some type of, not an allowance necessarily, because that's all goes into parenting and
Right.
your type of parenting. But if they get, $5 from grandpa or grandma, talk about what $5 can buy. Talk about what that could be in 20 years if they put it in the bank. So I get a lot of people who don't understand even compound interest. Simple interest, they don't even understand simple interest, let alone compound interest. So I think talking about that kind of thing, and there are a lot of good books out there these days written towards kids, because there are a lot of us, Rena-Fi, my company, other companies, that have realized that this is a huge problem. They're starting to develop materials for younger and younger and younger people, because the school doesn't teach this. There's nothing, and they keep saying that it would be great if schools taught this. So I think talking about what money buys with my kids, when we go to the grocery store and that kind of thing, we talk about, okay, how much I have a 5-year-old, and I'm always like, well, how many of these could we buy if we had $1? And what else could you buy if you didn't spend it on this kind of thing? So, and also the instant gratification that kids expect these days. It's okay to say no to your kids. And I get a lot of, and this kind of segues into the student loan issue, because I have a lot of parents in their 50s and 60s who are signing ridiculous student loans for their kids because they can't say no.
Right.
They think their kids have to have, some Ivy League education. And the government will garnish your Social Security for student loans. I have a lot of clients right now. They're taking 15% of their Social Security check for student loans. And so I think starting at a very young age, you have to say no when something doesn't fit and explain why to some extent. You shouldn't have to justify yourself to your kids all the time, but explain, that doesn't work for us this month. Here's our budget for whatever that thing is, whatever activity it is. And how about in 3 months if we do that or something like that? So.
Yeah, I had a long time to observe my brother and sisters and cousins and their kids and their parenting before I became a dad. Mm-hmm. So I saw a lot of stuff, and I had, I was very full of myself and my parenting wisdom before I had kids. And now, she's only 2.5, so we haven't had to have those tough conversations yet. Yeah. But I believe, you give them what they need and you teach them to work for what they want. And I think, with Sarah, I already start to do a little bit. Are you familiar with the marshmallow test?
Yes, where the instant you can have 2 later if you leave this one. Yeah.
One now or 2 later. And I think about that a lot. And I think especially with finance, there's a gentleman named John Green. He and his brother, they have a huge YouTube following, and it's justified. It's great, useful, authentic content. But he talks about how much your summer job is worth down the road. And he does a great job. We'll link to it. But he says, if you make this much money when you're 17, let's say, working all summer long, and you don't touch it, which is hard for a 17-year-old to do.
Right.
But, you don't touch it, and you make, I don't know, I'm just going to make this up, but let's say you make $5,000 over the course of the summer. A lot for a 17-year-old. Then whatever it is. If you don't touch it, then the next summer it's worth this much, and the summer after that. And by the time and I think he said you can make $150,000 the summer of your 17th year if you don't touch it and you just let it sit until retirement. 150 or something like that.
It's fairly, it's a big number. Yeah. The other thing with small children too, or children of any age, is the way you talk about money. I have people who come in and they've told their kids their whole lives, we're broke. And that, whatever you say to your kids is how they talk to themselves.
Yes.
And so I see a lot of that generational issue is because the parents have always said, we're broke. We can't do that. We're broke. Instead of looking about how can we improve our finances or saying no because we can't afford it right now, but how can we, work to get it, that kind of thing.
Let's now transition from younger children. And this isn't, because you're a credit and debt attorney and that sort of thing. We both have little kids, so but let's transition from that to let's say teenage years, right?
Teenagers, yeah.
So they're old enough that you can talk to them and they can understand complexity, and to some extent they can understand consequences. Right. They're teenagers, but still they can start to. So how do you help let's say your high school freshman start to get ready to not end up as a college senior with $80,000 in debt?
Right. So I think one of the very important things is to allow them to have jobs. I think that we have gotten away from allowing our 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And I had a job when I was 14. I worked in a restaurant when I was 14. And I know there are each state has different laws of how old you can be, what hours you can work, that kind of thing. But I think allowing kids to have that job and earn money and get a paycheck and see what the taxes that are coming out of it and how all of that works, because you may have made $200 this week, but your check may only be $150, and understanding that and building up some kind of desire to budget and desire to save money for certain things and that kind of thing when they're freshmen. I will also say for college, getting the best financial aid package with scholarships and going to a school that meets the degree that you need, but doesn't necessarily have to be, $80,000 a year, because there are kids coming out of school now with undergraduate degrees, with over $200,000 of student loan debt. And it's more than a mortgage in most places in the country. The Bay Area in California, it's not quite as
Is that where you are? Are you in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco Bay Area. So,
Oh, I'm in Walnut Creek. So
oh,
I'm,
okay, I'm in San Ramon.
oh, nice.
So
Right.
we're close
North
by. We can
Carolina.
have this in life.
Yes.
So when you're a freshman, grades are really important because sometimes scholarships and that kind of thing can be based on grades, but also your extracurricular activities, do things to set yourself up. And I will say that college is not the be all end all when you're 18.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who, myself included, I dropped out of college. It was boring to me and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went and got a good job instead. And there are a lot of industries out there these days that don't really require a college. It may be some kind of advanced schooling, but not necessarily college. So I think if you talk to your kids about what their actual interests are and what they want to do, that's much more important than forcing them to go to a 4-year university at 18 when they don't know
Right.
anything. They really don't know anything at 18. So I think you can set that up starting at a freshman or even younger. Like I've told my kids, I don't really, if they don't want to go to college, I have a 5-year-old who I've told that she needs to do well in school, but she doesn't necessarily need to go to college right away. There's all kinds of time to figure out what you want to do in life.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there are a lot of college planners out there too that will help figure out where the best grants are, where the best packages are for certain degree programs. Some schools give tons and tons of scholarships for their flagship degree programs because they want to be known for that.
Right.
And so if you have a good college planner, that can often help get you, free or very low cost schooling.
I've always thought of, maybe this is just the entrepreneur, the independent contractor in me,
Yeah.
but I think if you get a scholarship, right, whatever you do to get that scholarship, that is effectively a part-time job that pays you tax-free, right, pays
Exactly.
you a certain amount of money to be involved in Kiwanis or to do volunteerism or to go out for a sport,
whatever you did. Yep.
Whatever.
Yeah.
There's value. There's monetary value to things that you do that get you financial aid towards college. Because otherwise you're going to have to write, you or your parents, someone's going to have to write that check.
Right.
Or you're just not going to get to go. So that's.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that you can do, especially with degrees where the salary prospects aren't always the greatest. Like film is so much, they're great degrees and great industries to be in, but that's also a little bit of a hard industry to get a job in that's worth enough to pay back student loans. And so a lot of times with those, if you can get an internship or something before college and get connections, sometimes that will lead to more education than anything you could have ever learned in college. I have a brother who is a network engineer at a fairly big Fortune, probably 50 company, and he never went to college. He taught himself, he applied, and he got good connections through things. And I worked at a Fortune 10 company when I was younger without a college degree because I learned and found mentors and that kind of thing versus it's more about who you know than your degree these days, I think.
And, I agree. And sort of as a counter argument, somebody once said to me, that's a big value of going to college.
Yeah, it can be.
These connections, right? If you go to business school, I'm granted a business degree is probably going to lead you to some money, but let's say you go to business school, the degree is great, but you now have all of these connections.
Alum connections, yes.
And I think that, again, it's a little outside of scope for but there's value there, right? Those connections can lead to a better job or new opportunities or a mentorship or whatever. There's financial value in those connections, which can help also.
If you use them. I have a lot of people who come through undergrad that have never figured out how to work socially to network and use their connections. So yes, I think that is maybe another, besides financial literacy, that's another school that needs to be encouraged. But
I agree 100%. So let's say now, ideally, as a parent, you're steering your child in. You've sort of you've brought them up in a way that they value money and their money versus your money versus all that sort of thing. And then they work hard and they get some sort of whatever. They make smart decisions so that they have a minimal amount of college debt. Maybe you can't skip entirely, but you have a minimal amount of college debt. So now they're in the workplace. and they're making money, but they have these student loans.
Yep.
At some point, everybody who has student loan debt that they can't manage was in a place where they could have managed it better, right?
Probably,
Is that
yeah.
true or not
They could have made, so a lot of the people that I meet that have student loan debt just signed on the dotted line when the financial aid package was passed to them. So they could have made a better decision at that point, but no one talks about that. And so I don't really fault people who have significant amount of student loan debt from when they were 18 years old, because it's never really explained to them what this is going to cost.
Yeah.
So that's starting when they're younger, getting into that. But at some point, student loans will go into default and they won't be able to make the payments. And at that point, there are a lot of options available for them to get them out of default. And people don't ask about that, or they don't know that there's options there. So I think you can make a conscious decision even when you're in trouble to find out what you can do with the debt. There are a lot of forgiveness programs out there, especially if you work for a nonprofit or a government agency. And there are income-based repayments as well that people, it seems like the servicers don't tell anybody that they qualify for any of these relief programs. So yes, they can make decisions, but at some point you have to make the decision that you're going to fix it.
So, one option is always find an attorney, find somebody who can help you with that. Are there resources, like, is there a website or anything like that that you know of or you recommend that where people can go and just say, what are the student loan relief options? Is that?
Yeah, so the student loan, there's the government website and I have to look up exactly. It's either like studentloan.gov or myfederalloan.gov. They've changed it a couple times, but you can go there and it has a calculator that calculates out some of your options, and it'll tell you whether you qualify or what the requirements are to qualify for it. The problem becomes is the servicers don't always give you the right information, the right application forms. If you're applying for public service forgiveness, which means you work for 10 years in a public service, either nonprofit, a school, government, and you try to get your loans forgiven, if you didn't sign up for the right payment plan, none of those years count. And so it becomes making sure you have to stay on top of things and make sure that you're qualifying every year for it, or that you've talked to someone, an expert, to make sure that you're doing it right. I had a client who came in one time and she would have qualified for 3 of the last 5 years, but she didn't submit the right form. And so we had to erase those 3 years off of our plan, basically. So yeah, so making sure that you stay on top of things is really important.
Okay.
But this myfederalloan.gov is myfedloan. Myfedloan.gov is the one that, yeah.
All right. We'll add it to the bottom third here. Now, you talked about parents and grandparents who have student loan debt, not for their, like, we think of student loan debt and we think, well, that's the students.
Right. Nope.
But it's transgenerational, apparently.
It is. So the biggest problem these days is the cost of college. And I mean, this is in the media, this is everywhere. And student loans are up to like $1.6 trillion of student loan debt. Like 28% of them are in default of all the student loans there. So it's a huge problem. But what happens is the cost of education is so high, they've limited what undergrad students can borrow, which is smart. There's a fairly low limit of what undergrad, but the solution for that was to offer all of these federally backed parent student loans. And so I have parents who are taking on $50,000 a year of student loan debt for 4 years. So it ends up owing a couple $100,000, and they're in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Their ability to earn money to be able to pay for those is not that great. And you never know what the job market, what's going to happen. And there's a lot of people who get laid off in that age group because as they get older, and I know it's illegal, but it happens and you can't find another job. So I do see a lot of parents and grandparents who have student loans. They'll never be able to pay, and they have fewer options because they have fewer repayment plans available for those types of loans. But yeah. And Social Security getting garnished at 15% is a big hit to someone who's relying on Social Security to live on.
Yeah.
Especially in the Bay Area where we're at, you can't live on, $2,200 a month, which is the max, I think, for Social Security right now.
Yeah. If you're on a fixed income, every penny counts. Or I should say, if you're on a fixed income, or if you're going to be on a fixed income at some point in the not so distant future, you need to make sure that you have every penny of that fixed income that you can
Mhm.
count on. And yeah, 15% hit is huge. Is
Yeah.
huge for these folks.
So my advice is never ever take on a student loan for anyone, not yourself. I don't care if it's your, unless you have the reserves already sitting in a bank account and you just want a low interest rate because
Right.
interest rates have gone up and down and up and down. If you don't have the funds to pay for that, I would never take on a student loan for my kids.
Yeah. And so that can be a tough conversation.
It can be. It's a very tough. And I have clients who come in and they're like, "No, we're taking on these student loans," and I'm like,
Because we'll do anything to give them the best possible chance for a
exactly.
rainbow
But they don't
unicorn.
understand that doesn't necessarily give them the best possible chance.
Yeah.
There's other ways to get that best possible chance. So,
Yeah. So let's say a grandparent who
mm-hmm.
has some resources, right? Says, well, I want to, your mom and dad can't help you out, but you worked hard. I want to make sure that you get to go to the school that you want to get to go to, right? That's
Yep.
a very grandparent kind of mindset
Yes, it is.
there.
Yep.
So, and the kid says, well, I want to go to Stanford, right? I want to go to
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I want to go. What, I mean, obviously the grandparents have to have a conversation with themselves to say,
Right.
this is $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt
Right.
that we can't repay,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Realistically,
And you may have to say no. It
definitely
may
say
be
no.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say to grandparents out there that want to contribute to their grandkids' financial futures, when they're 0, 1, or 2, put that $5,000 into the bank account that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And then it'll be, $100,000 by the time they're, well, probably not that close, but you know what I mean? Like put that money into like a 529 or something like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a new grandparent,
Mm-hmm.
know that 18 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
you might get hit up for 200, or who knows what it's going to be at that time, 200
Right.
grand that you can't take on. So put $100 a month or $200 a month, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
into this account. This is your whatever, and that way you're helping them out more
Right.
than you would ever help them out by taking on that debt.
Right. And you can still retire and still do, because you should fully fund your own retirement before you pay for even parents.
Yeah.
Make sure your own retirement is funded, because I see a lot of 55 to 70-year-old people who have nothing in retirement. And there's a statistic out there, I'm sure you've seen it in the news, that like less than 90% of people have more than $7,000 in a retirement account.
Sorry, you said less than 90?
Yeah, and under 90 or under 10% have more than 7,000. So 90% or more have $7,000 or less in a retirement account. And then a huge majority, 90% or so of people, have less than $400 saved for an emergency.
Yeah.
You see that's been in the news recently too, where the statistics out there.
Yeah.
But you need to fund your own retirement.
Yeah. And I think also, besides avoiding a potentially catastrophic financial situation,
Yep.
If when they're born, you're putting grandma and grandpa are putting $100 a month,
Yep.
and Aunt Mary and Uncle Joe are putting in $25. You've got who are doing this so that this money will accumulate. I think that can, throughout that child's life,
Mm-hmm.
be part of their financial literacy education.
Exactly.
Yep. A little bit from a lot of sources over time is going to take care of things. Right. And that can be a model even for a child earning, right? Get a paper route and you do a whatever, just these little things.
You put 10% here, 10% goes to your college account. You can spend a third, whatever and that's up to each individual family, what they want to teach as far as values and stuff go. But yeah. And I think,
well, I was just going to say, but the concept, right? It introduces this concept at an early age and consistently to avoid this sort of.
Exactly. And for a soapbox issue, I think college costs will decrease significantly as soon as there's not this free money available for colleges to rely on all these student loans out there. If they weren't relying on student loans, the cost of college it's supply and demand. It's as more supply is available, the colleges are raising their price for the demand out there. So
Yeah,
that's
and
my soapbox issue.
you're right. Yeah, if the student loans weren't available,
Yeah.
fewer people would go to college,
Right.
and colleges would have to compete on price
Yep.
to get that smaller sort of share of
Exactly.
the pie.
Yeah. And people would think harder about going to college if it actually cost them money out of pocket
Right.
than it would free money from student loans. That's
Yep.
not free.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing's free. Nothing's free.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been fantastic, Jen. I really appreciate it. Let's see. I think we talked through. Oh, you know what? One thing we haven't talked about is relationships. Talked about
Oh, yeah.
relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the impact that you've seen on debt and credit in general on relationships, and also what are some things that couples who are in crisis can do,
Yeah.
or that couples can do to avoid getting in crisis?
Really good questions. 44% of divorces these days are due to financial issues. And I see it a lot in my practice where a couple will come in and they're on the verge. They're like, we think we may divorce. We're not sure. We're trying to figure out what our options are. We have all this debt. And a lot of times one spouse has no idea what debt they have.
Right.
Or they'll come in and the husband will say, oh, by the way, we have $50,000 of credit card debt. And the wife has no idea. Or I had one where they came in and she had no idea that they hadn't paid taxes in like 6 years. And so there's this huge IRS bill out there. So a lot of times it's a communication issue. They don't want to talk, even within a relationship where you trust the person, you don't want to talk about money and finances. So I always tell people, before you get married, before you walk down the aisle, think of one of your homework assignments is not just, planning the wedding, but have a financial strategy session to figure out what debt looks like. If you have student loans, California is a community property state. So even if you have premarital student loans, your wages could be on the hook in the future for your spouse's pre-marriage student loans. And there's all kinds of discussion that goes into when that takes effect and that kind of thing. But if you don't understand where your finances are at when you get married, that's not setting yourself up for success when it comes to money. And people have very different ideas of how to manage money. We all grew up differently. And so often you'll have the saver and the spender as, for some reason, opposites attract.
Right.
And you always get those too. And if you don't talk about that, you're likely to be one of these statistics out there with divorce, because it becomes a point where you can't talk about it with each other and you're so frustrated and you just want the stress to be done.
Right.
So I do tell people, talk to either a therapist. If you do premarital counseling, my firm offers pre-marriage strategy sessions to go through what's on your credit. If you want to buy a house, what does that all look like? And then refer them out to, the right financial advisors, retirement planning, that kind of thing, to make sure that their financial life is set up going into marriage, not just, whether they want to have kids or that kind of thing. Because everyone thinks about lifestyle things, but they don't think about finances. So I think talking about it before you get married is really important.
Yeah, and finances impacts all of those other lifestyle things.
Yeah.
So what about a couple that is in crisis or close to crisis? What can they do?
So and my tagline on everything is know your rights and options. So if you're in a marriage where you're kind of on the brink, but you're still cooperating, find someone together that you can talk to and go through your finances. If you've already crossed over that cliff where you're like, this isn't going to work, there's nothing he can do or nothing she can do at this point that's going to make this better, find out your own rights and options. Because I see a lot of things that happen between separation and divorce, retirement accounts being drained, debt being run up, that could have been avoided if they had found out what their rights and options were earlier on in the process. So education is probably the biggest thing I can, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here, that's why we're all here, but education on what you can do specific to your situation, not a Google search, is really important. Yeah.
Well, you're preaching to the choir in a way with me, because I believe in these things, but I don't there's a lot of new information for me just in this conversation that we've had. But our goal with having these interviews is that folks who subscribe to Rena-Fi or are able to view some of our clips on YouTube, that sort of things,
right,
they might not be the choir, right?
Right.
They might
Exactly.
be either.
Like, oh, that speaks to me, or that's my situation. I can do
Absolutely.
something about this. Yeah.
Well,
Of
and,
course.
and this is the thing I think in life in general, you know,
Mhm.
we have a mission that we want to accomplish. You have yours.
Yeah.
Hopefully everybody has some sort of mission that they want to accomplish. But the people that we encounter, the things that we hear, the all of that,
Hmm.
we as the people who are putting it out there have no
Hmm.
idea who it's going to reach and how it's going to impact them.
Right.
And the
Right.
people who might hear this, you know, you never know. Our CEO, actually, our CEO talks a lot about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly
Yep.
Effective People, and
Yep.
how he read it when he was younger, and it just didn't do anything for him.
Yep.
Then years later, maybe decades later, he read it again, and things just clicked in a way that
Yep.
they didn't before.
Yep.
So for everybody who's listening, I hope that you've gotten a lot of benefit from this conversation. I know I have personally, and I hope that you will take anything of this, any part of this conversation that resonates for you, and do something with it to make your life better, or the lives of your loved ones, or the lives
Mhm.
of people that you meet. So thank
Help
you, Jen.
others.
Yeah, help
Help
others.
others. That's all I have to say is help others. It may not be you, but help others. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Stick
Thank
around.
you.
We're going to talk a little bit off camera to get some of the stuff
Sure.
you know, ironed out. But really, really appreciate it. And can you just give us one last time your name, your contact information, or website, or the firm, anything like that?
Sure, sure. So my name is Jen Lee. My law firm is Jen Lee Law, and my website's very easy. It's just www.jenleelaw.com. JenLeelaw.com. And you can schedule appointments there. I have lots of resources, videos, blog posts, and stuff about general problems with debt and credit. So feel free to check it out.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.